So begin by drawing your inner or your lower spine in, and then moving your awareness slowly up the vertebrae, one on top of the other, as if you're stringing pearls, one on top of the other. Until you reach the crown of the head. Imagine that the body is suspended from the crown of the head by a small string. Widen the chest, soften the neck, lower the chin slightly, soften the well at the base of the throat. Release any tension in the jaw, around the eyes, and sit with dignity, intuitively. And then take 3 very deep breaths, drawing the breath all the way down into the belly and holding for a time, and then releasing as slowly as you can through the nose. And one of the issues with how breath meditation has been taught in the West is the admonition to focus right off the bat onto one point, usually at the tip of the nose, which is very difficult for most Westerners and modern educated people in general. We tend to think a lot. So one can approach breath meditation initially from a more robust perspective or a broader perspective. So if your mind is calm and wants to just settle onto one point, then feel free to let it settle onto the tip of the nose and follow the breath there. But you can also divide the body into 3 chambers. The upper area from the neck up, sort of a bubble around the head, then a chamber from the throat to the bottom of the diaphragm, sort of the torso, and then another sort of bubble from the diaphragm down to the tailbone. And first establish awareness in the top chamber around the head and breathe while keeping your awareness there for a time. Feel free to adjust the breath until it feels comfortable, making it lighter, heavier, longer, shorter on the inhale or the exhale. And if it helps, you can imagine a white orb or ball of light in the center of that chamber, expanding and contracting with the breath. Or you can imagine the breath as a white mist coming in and out of that chamber with the inhalation and the exhalation. Or you can just place your awareness there without a visualization if you'd like. And feel how the breath feels in that space, breathing there for a time. And when you lose interest or the mind naturally wants to drop, allow it to drop to the next chamber in the torso and breathe there for a time. And then move down to the navel area, the third chamber, and breathe there for a time. And in each of those chambers, you can explore the sensations. For example, moving your awareness to the left and right. And you'll usually find one side of your body is more numb than the other. And over time, that'll correct itself, but you can take note. And after reaching the third chamber, expand awareness to encompass the whole body, from the crown of the head to the tailbone, in a wide bubble. And breathe there for a time. And then repeat the circuit. And you can do this until the mind begins to calm and want to settle onto one point. And at that point, you can let it rest at the place where the breath feels most prominent, usually the tip of the nose or the chest area. And rest there, but still maintaining awareness in the periphery of the whole field of the body, like a spider resting at the center of a web, but aware of the whole web's vibrations. And this movement is a way of reacquainting ourselves with the somatic sense and our bodies in general, and dropping the awareness from the head. And the goal eventually is this following the breath at one point while maintaining a wide awareness, but really tracking the breath continuously at a subtle level at that one point, as you would a silk thread. So feel free to do that, and if the mind wanders, just smilingly bring it back. It's not a problem. And this Wednesday is the Visakha Puja, which is the day traditionally we remember the Buddha's birth, awakening, and death. And it's just a helpful moment to reflect on the qualities of that teacher. This is one of the objects of recollection recommended, is recollection of the Buddha. And I think it's most helpful sometimes to recall his humanity and the sense of his compassion. There are many stories of him waking up in the morning and then walking 40 kilometers or so to meet someone he felt could receive the teaching. And there are others of beggars and lepers scrambling to get out of the way of his coming, and him just stopping and turning to them, and them feeling ashamed to be in the way or taking the attention of someone of such high caste, a Khattiya, a warrior caste. But his complete putting that aside and instead just teaching them the Dhamma as best he was able. Having faith that it was what was in someone's heart that determined their value, which is a radical thing to think in India 2,500 years ago. We can recall how he, in some suttas, was walking through the monastery and stumbled across a sick monk who was covered in his own excrement, and the other monks had let him lay there because he was too sick. And the Buddha stopped and with his assistant tended to him himself, brought him to a hut, cleaned him up, and reflected and said that anyone, bhikkhu, who cares for another sick bhikkhu, it's as if caring for the Buddha himself. Or one can reflect on his foresight into the situation of women, even in a time when they were considered far, far less valuable than men. In that he was one of the first teachers in history to acknowledge that they could become awakened in just the same way. And he created this order of nuns, bhikkhunis, which was the first escape available to women from the confines of marriage for those who were caught. And for those who were married, he even lowered the age at which they could ordain to 13 so that they could escape from bad marriage. Or just in general, how for 45 years after what some believe was awakening, at least Buddhists, he taught ceaselessly every day, despite pains, despite political upheavals, receiving everyone who came to him. And in the end, the wealth of teachings that he left was immense. It would take about 22,000 pages. It's 12 times the length of the Bible. Burmese Tripitaka chanters chanted in full, and it takes them 30 days at 10 hours a day. And just left an astounding gift to the world. So regardless of whether one has faith in the teaching as at that deep of a level or not, just the presence and history of a teacher of such compassion and foresight is something worth remembering and being grateful for. And he refused to define himself in terms of a noun. There's a story of a Brahmin named Dona who asked if he was a god or a king or what, and he responded by saying, "I'm awake." And in the essence, this is what the recollection of the Buddha really means, is the awakened quality of the heart, or the awakened heart. And so one can just reflect on that internally, repeating the word Buddha, which means awake, if they want, and imagining light around the heart. So I'll do a brief talk. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So welcome everyone. Okay. Welcome to all the people on live stream as well. Hello. We're broadcasting from Cascade Hermitage today in Winthrop. It's sunny out so far. So we'll just be doing a brief talk and Q&A. And then those who are here can partake of the meal together. And those who are live streaming can snack where they are or something. So as this is our first group meeting on Sundays in the area, I thought it would be good to speak on the Buddha's instructions around community and the principles of cordiality, is how he put it. And the sutta is called the Kosambia Sutra. It's Majjhima Nikaya 48. And the Buddha gave it after the bhikkhus in a monastery near Kosambi had gotten into a pretty uninspiring dispute over basically one of them not flushing the toilet, which nearly tore apart the community. And the lay people were not impressed and stopped feeding the monks. And then so the Buddha admonished them, and then they didn't listen. So he left, and then they started to listen, and he came back. But what we did get out of this extremely inspiring event was one of the most beautiful teachings, where the Buddha details 6 principles of harmony in community and spiritual community. And one of the most significant quotes of the Buddha that's referenced continuously is a moment when Venerable Ananda, his close disciple and assistant, says that Kalyanamitta is, in his opinion, half of the holy life. And Kalyanamitta, Kalyana means beautiful, and Mitta means friendship. So beautiful friendship in the Buddhist conception is spiritual friendship. And it's of a different quality than, for me, than all the friendships I'd had before I began to rest in this sort of relationship with people, where your care for someone and connection to them is no longer predicated on how well your personalities or views on things fit at any specific moment, which is so fragile and constantly subject to the winds of how you both are feeling in any one moment, or what you've heard about this person or that person, but rather on the sense of a shared goal of shaping yourselves into a tool of compassion for the world, and a shared trajectory of practice in that. And I remember leaving for Thailand and people being worried that this would be the end of their relationship with me. But for those who were practicing back here, the spiritual friends I'd already had, leaving for the sake of a goal in line with Dhamma, with the practice, felt like it only brought me closer to those I cared for, because our paths still moved in parallel. And I find that's the quality of Kalyanamitta, is that resonance only increases if both people are walking on the same path, regardless of distance or time. And it's a really beautiful thing to have community like that, and I think absolutely essential, because without it, we are hard-pressed to follow the admonition or the instruction of the First Noble Truth, which is to turn towards our suffering and our stress and to comprehend it, and to lay careful hands on it so that we can understand its shape and how it shapes us, and eventually to let go of it and find something beyond. But that instruction to stop and turn towards our suffering is one of the hardest things in the most significant moments of a life. And I don't think most of us are strong enough to restrain the palsied shaking of our hands and heart long enough to clearly and with compassion look at our suffering and our difficulty without that friendship, and to be held by that. So this is a really important quality, this spiritual friendship, and I think it's worth making much of, especially when you're moving to a new place and valuing that sort of family. So in the 6 principles of cordiality, the first 3 are maintaining acts of body, speech, and mind towards one's companions, both in public and in private. And the acts of body are simple enough to understand in that, at least in public. And I think one of the unique, people have this idea that monastics live off in, run off into their huts in the forest and live there in isolation. But I've met many Western monks who've tried to do that and been pretty miserable. In fact, I think I've met almost none who haven't been not miserable doing that. And one of the great reasons that the Ajahn Chah lineage has been successful is because its focus on community and communal living has been one of the most important aspects of it. And in the words of my teacher, Ajahn Pasano, or one of them, at Abhayagiri, we once asked him about living together, and he said, living with other people, it's terrible, but it's also the best thing in the world, and it shapes us into much better people. And one of the most important elements of it is the opportunity to give constantly every day towards those we live with. And I think we all have that, whether living in, with a partner or spouse or child. And in Sri Lanka, there's a wonderful practice where one doesn't eat until one has given something to eat to another person. And these are simple but powerful practices in ways of learning to give and to give up self at that very basic level. And in the West, people are attracted to the wisdom teachings in Buddhism, but forget that the first paramita, or spiritual perfection, the Buddha taught was dana, giving. And when you go to Thailand, you see it in the culture. Thai culture has been profoundly shaped by Buddhism. About 30% of the language is based on Pali, which is the Theravada scriptural language. And this thread of giving runs through the culture and brightens everything about the country. There's a reason they call it the land of smiles. So Theravada initially gets sometimes dismissed as a, dour approach or something like that, but it's not. You see what happens when it threads its way through a culture and what it does to the people in that culture. So showing and cultivating generosity through bodily acts is a simple way of moving towards a harmony and growing these bonds with people. And I think one of the really interesting parts of the phrasing in the sutta is that one also cultivates these bodily acts in private. And in the sutta where the Buddha is admonishing Venerable Ananda for saying that Kalyanamitta, spiritual friendship, is only half the holy life, he says, no, Venerable Ananda, it's the whole of the holy life, in the sense that I am also the spiritual friend of all those who practice this path. And so how one can honor that sort of spiritual friendship or recollection is, in private, is significant, in that most people in the West understand how a leaning of the spirit conditions our bodily actions. You feel care for someone, so you give. But one of the great insights, and what has maybe been lost in Western culture with its complete moving away from ritual and tradition, has been the fact that bodily actions condition the heart very powerfully. So when we take on, say, the 5 precepts that the Buddha said were the basis of human life, of not killing, not stealing, not engaging in sexual misconduct, not lying, not taking intoxicants, they can seem like this ascetic admonition, and our reaction against the Puritanism of the early days of America has led us to dismiss things like that as sort of not very life affirming. But what's interesting is that when you don't kill for 1 or 2 or 3 years, then something changes in your heart, where the spider that used to be this gross thing, crawling towards you or on you, still pretty gross if it crawls on you, but what happens is that you start to think it's actually kind of cute. Or your Ajahn Amaro has a great story where he was trying to keep a flower in his room and it got infested with aphids, and he tried to keep it clean by picking all the aphids off every day. And then one day he just decided to stop keeping a plant and to start keeping an aphid farm. And that was the solution. But something does change over time when you change your bodily acts towards people and towards everything in the world, that your heart changes too. And that's the power of ritual. So whether we know it or not, we already worship something. You look at what's on the top shelf or the highest point in most houses, and it's the liquor. And you look at what takes up the altar, and it's the large screen TV. And we face that TV a lot. And we might not explicitly bow to it, but maybe we kind of do a little bit too. And so we have our rituals, and we have our altars, and we have our props. And we worship whether we know it or not, because we direct the heart, and that is worship. We direct attention, and that is worship. We watch football and dress up, and we engage in ritual whether we know it or not. So how do you create an environment that worships what is worthy of worship? So I think this is how we show bodily acts of love towards spiritual aspiration in private, in a way that really affects us. If you elevate what deserves to be elevated, and you create a place in your home where the highest point is a beautiful image. And if you're Buddhist, that can be the Buddha. If you're Christian, it can be Christ. If you're Muslim, you can find an image or the Quran or something, but some sort of spiritual aspiration which reminds you of what you should be aiming for every day. And you can set aside a place in your home for that. And if the first thing you do on waking up is to bow to that image, then, and the last thing you do every night is to bow to that image, whatever it is for you, then it will change your life. And then the verbal acts of loving kindness. So often are just being quiet and listening to people. And I've heard someone say that right speech almost always can be phrased as questions. And I don't think that's completely true, but there's something to it in terms of people's need to feel seen and heard being so important. And one of the things we're cultivating by cultivating spiritual practice is an inner resource of happiness through meditation, through giving, such that we no longer are depending on others for our fulfillment. We no longer need to control what they are. And that lets us listen to them and take them as they are and really love them in that sense, and not try to maintain a white-knuckled grip and have our relationship determined by how they are or are not meeting our needs. And this changes the world we live in from a hall of mirrors into a real world populated with other people. And then when we sit with someone, we can really listen to them and see them. And that's the biggest gift you can give to someone. I know Mother Teresa, this isn't totally relevant, but I really like it, is Mother Teresa was once asked what she said when she prayed. And she said she didn't ask for anything, she just listened. And they asked what God said, and she said, He listens back. And I think there's something to that, and maybe that's how we could clarify meditation in certain ways. And also, just as a practical note, when you're using verbal instruction to direct your meditation, as Westerners with a strong inclination towards flagellating ourselves in meditation and not meditation, phrasing verbal instructions as questions is much gentler. So saying, how do I know the breath? Can I be aware of the breath now? Initiates a natural and gentle response from the body and mind rather than a statement. And then the verbal acts towards others when they're not there. This is perhaps the biggest one for all of us, is gossip, because we really like to gossip. and it's very easy to fall into, but it's much more damaging than we think. And I know some monks who are so good at this. They won't say anything about another person behind their backs. And it means you can't have those little sessions where you bond over talking about this person or that. And yet over time, it gives you a huge sense of security with that person because you know that they'll never say anything about you behind your back. And that's a great gift. And this is the one that takes maybe the most restraint for all of us, is gossip. Saint Teresa of Avila made the determination in her life to never say anything about another person that she would not say to their face. And I think that's something worth cultivating, even if it's nearly impossible to keep up for a long period of time. But I've met monks who've done it. And then mental acts of loving kindness towards those around you. That's a good one. I think with many people, it's easy enough. But my teacher would always recommend starting out any meditation session with 10 minutes of metta or loving kindness. And I think that's especially good as Westerners. We are extremely brutal to ourselves. And to cultivate that glow in the heart regularly every day will change your life, especially when you wake up. Because upon waking up, the mind is trying to crystallize around something, and it will almost always go to that person who you are arguing with, or that one conversation that you could have where you should have said that. And you can dwell in that state of mild aversiveness pretty consistently through a year or a lifetime. But if you take that moment right when you get up to very consciously bring metta or loving kindness to mind, then you make the self crystallize around something profoundly wholesome, and it pays dividends throughout the day in a way that metta cultivated at other times, apart from maybe states of pretty deep concentration, does not provide. And then those we're aversive to, really taking the chance to cultivate, taking them as our teachers, and really conceptualizing those who annoy us as bodhisattvas brought for our benefit and to shape us into better beings. And if nothing else, then to develop patient endurance allows us to be grateful for even that. There's a story of the first teacher who brought Buddhism to Tibet, and he heard that all Tibetans were unbelievably kind. So he brought his chaiwala with him, who was really annoying, just so he'd have someone to practice with, which I liked. And then there's the famous story, which might be apocryphal, of the meditation teacher in the West, who there was a disciple in the dojo who annoyed everyone. And one day he just went too far and they chased him out. And as soon as the master found out that he'd been run out of the monastery or the center, he admonished everyone and said that he paid that man to be there to train everyone in how to love better. So I thought that was quite good. And I know that the monks I've lived with who have been the most difficult, and there was one monk who would constantly get on my case for just about everything. When I started thinking of them as my teacher for that year and really ways of refining my conduct, then they became the best part of my practice for that time. And I could feel genuine gratitude when I wasn't really annoyed, which was about 50-50. And Ajahn Chah used to say that 80% of the practice is knowing we should let go of something and not being able to. So don't hold yourself to too high a standard in this, but it's worth trying. And the fourth quality is to, whatever gains one has gained in a righteous way, one does not partake of them without first having shared them with one's companions in the holy life. So that's the admonition to give, whatever you get, even if it's the food from your alms bowl, which is probably more relevant for monastics, unless you guys have more different lives than I think. But I think that's, this practice in Sri Lanka of never eating before you've given is a great one. Although I think it might work better for dinner than for breakfast. So maybe adjust it as you will. But I think we can hold that intention throughout our lives to take those small moments where we can give more. And instead of just putting someone's laundry in the basket, actually taking the time to fold it. And this is how, if everything in our lives is taken as an ornament of the mind and a chance to shape ourselves through intention, then everything becomes overlaid with meaning. And I talk about this one scene from a samurai movie I saw as a layman, which was a terrible movie, but there was one scene in it where this man comes to the dojo and talks to his teacher, and the teacher says, let us have a practice battle. And the student says, I'm saving my energy for an important battle, for a real one. And the teacher says, there's no important or unimportant acts. All acts are equally important. And this is the great insight that the Buddhist path, or the path of spiritual practice, gives us, is if every action is held primarily as a means towards shaping the heart, and if intention is the paramount thing, then there are no small acts. And it overlays life again with meaning. Even the dilute and comfortable life of a suburban existence becomes infused with purpose again. And it becomes a chance to cultivate the heart or let it go. And that moment when you take someone's laundry out of the dryer and decide to not fold it or to fold it becomes the hero's journey, in essence. And you can decide which voice you're going to follow. But this is how giving can, in every act, in every moment, becomes a chance to change ourselves. And the fifth quality is one has sila, or morality, in tune with one's companions in the holy life. And the benefits that the Buddha spoke about in terms of morality is that one fears no danger from anywhere and dies unconfused. And I think it can be difficult to see at first how living with a clear conscience in terms of one morality could do those things, how it is a refuge, how it eliminates fear and lets one not fear death. But I think that what happens when one takes on these restraints in terms of their behavior and does not harm others is that one is aligning one's purpose and heart with not only one's deepest potential, but also with a much deeper harmony of the world, and with a path that is not dependent on external conditions. Because the reasons we break morality, the reasons we would kill or slap the mosquito or take what is not given, the reasons we engage in sexual misconduct, lie, it has to do with our trying to mold the worldly winds of pleasure, pain, fame, disrepute, wealth, gain, loss, all these things to our own liking, which means we're investing them with our hearts. We are, through our action and breaking that morality, we are saying that we're taking refuge in them, in the five khandhas, as the Buddha said, the body, memory, the personality, the external conditions, which inevitably change and will shift. And as soon as our heart identifies with those things and invests in them by taking action in order and solely for their sake, for the sake of pleasure, for the sake of avoiding embarrassment, as soon as we've done that, then we have fundamentally changed our trajectory from a trajectory in line with Dhamma and with the spiritual path and goal, and of using life not as a refuge and the world as a refuge, but rather the spiritual path being using the world as a chance to learn and shape ourselves, regardless of pleasure or pain or fame or disrepute or embarrassment, into a better tool. As soon as we've broken that restraint and elevated our trying to shape those external conditions by acting for their sake, then we've invested our hearts in those things. And suddenly our heart knows that it's given itself to something that is delicate and fragile and changing, and which will slip through our fingers one way or the other. And there's immense insecurity in that, and you feel it. You feel the disintegration. When you partake of a immoral act, when you break what you know, a determination you've made or a principle you hold, you feel it in your body. It becomes weak. And I think one of the phrases the Buddha uses to describe pure sila or morality is untorn, unbroken, unsplattered. And for me, that's the best image for how it feels to break morality, is a rusty nail tearing cloth, and it does not mend easily. And it makes you extremely vulnerable. But if you have kept morality, if you've aligned every action with a path that transcends the changing conditions of the world, and then you have identified and yourself with and moved your trajectory in line, not with changing conditions, but with something that is beyond those conditions. And there's immense security in that. And the heart intuits it. And death and the changing nature of relationship and of all those conditions which will shift are no longer the threat they would be otherwise, because that's not where your heart's giving itself to. And I'm always astounded by how very subtle moments can represent that complete shift in trajectory. In any moment, frequently you can hear it in the voice in your head. The voice of delusion and defilement has an oily feel to it when you're trying to convince yourself of something or to do something that you know you shouldn't. It's the con artist. Whereas the voice of knowledge, of clear knowing, and of the spiritual path is a calm and quiet voice, even when it speaks with urgency, like get out now. And I think feeling the quality of voice can help us determine what action to take sometimes in that way. And this is what the Buddha said around keeping morality, is especially the 8 precepts, is that just for one day I will live like the noble ones live, the enlightened beings. And when you do this, you're tuning yourself to the same resonance as the saints of tradition and of history. And that's a beautiful thing to do. And if you're living with others who are also tuned to that, then you feel it. And I find constantly when I meet people who practice, I can see it in them. They shine. And I know some people would identify that with the chitta, or what we call the mind heart. And that gets covered over years by programs and habit patterns. But when you meet someone who's been practicing and has cultivated that small distance between their programming, then suddenly the chitta or heart, I think the Christians might call it the soul, shines through again. You see it clearly in children, then you see it very clearly in the masters I've met. I've never seen anyone who's shown that much, and it shakes you. And the final quality, the 6th that the Buddha said was conducive to communal harmony, was right view, which is noble, transcendent, leading outward, leading to the end of stress. And there's 7 parts of that, which is way too much to go into the next 5 minutes. But I I think what it speaks to mostly is the fact that when you have a shared trajectory with those around you, it's of immense value and strengthens community and binds it. And I think it's why so many of the communal living situations of the 70s broke, is because there was no binding vision. And it's like a bike that is moving at half speed, it gets really wobbly. And only when our lives or our community have trajectory, they always have a trajectory, that's the thing. And if we aren't moving that very consciously towards the spiritual or towards some sign of goodness, then it is moving in the other direction. There's no stasis. So that's how we hold each other, is we help and encourage each other on this path. And one of those 7 qualities of right view is the strength of one endowed with right view. And the Buddha speaks about that strength in 2 ways. He said that when one hears the teaching, one lends ear and gives oneself and one's mind completely to the teaching. And the second strength of one with right view is that when one hears the Dhamma, the teaching, that they grow joyful at that. And you see this even in enlightened beings in the suttas. They would gather and speak about Dhamma, and you sort of wonder what they're talking about. I mean, they're enlightened, but they still take joy in that, and it's one of the best blessings. And I find that's true. People think that the life of renunciation is a soul-deadening thing, or asceticism is some life-denying path. But my sense of those who have taken on this path, either in robes or out of robes, is that what you take on when you take on a simpler life and give up going to the movies every weekend, maybe, or duck out of the party 30 minutes early to go meditate, is you aren't giving up anything. Life was never given meaning for me by the latest Avengers movies, or the coffee date with some person or the hour of talking about outdoor gear. What really lent life its meaning to me was the conversations about the heart and the spiritual path. And that's what you gain. And you just open space to that. Like Ajahn Amaro said, renunciants are the real hedonists. And when life has mindfulness at its center and this quality of knowing, a nun, Venerable Dhammadina, in the sutta speaks about how neutral feeling is painful when experienced without knowledge and pleasant when experienced with knowledge. And when we have mindfulness and anchor that mindfulness with a meditation practice every day, 20 minutes a day at least, that's basic hygiene. But if you can get to 45 minutes once a day or 45 minutes twice a day, that will change a life. Then everything in life becomes infused with freshness again. And that proverbial fall of grace, which we've all experienced after childhood, or which most of us have, where that freshness and beauty becomes so much harder to access, becomes once again visible and available. And this is why the practice is good in the beginning and good in the middle and good in the end, is that it's not a soul-deadening path. It's one of joy. And when we hold each other in that, but it's a joy that takes restraint to begin to taste. It's like the taste of fresh snow. And it's sweet, but only in a way that we can appreciate after we've taken some time to let the other tastes fade a little bit. And that's what spiritual community is for, is we hold each other in that. And then we have a chance to all move towards a meaning which is deep and sustaining and secure. And so I'm deeply grateful that to be welcomed by the community in Winthrop, and very happy that my parents have as well. And I hope that everyone here becomes part of that friendship. And thank you for coming. So I think we have some quiet time for Q&A if we want. If people have anything they want to talk about,
What's the heading of the 6 qualities?
The place you can find it in the suttas is the Middle Length Discourses, number 48, but it's called the Kosambia Sutra at Kosambi. And Kosambi was the city where all the monks were arguing about the toilet. So, yeah, it's not a terribly inspiring lead-up story, but what we got out of it is a pretty good thing. And I only went into part of it, actually, so, yeah. See you, Charles. Speaking of spiritual friends, Charles came all the way up from Portland to spend time building on the property of the Cascade Hermitage, and we got up half a shed.
Yeah, we got it stabilized.
Yeah, sort of.
It looks like
Yeah, it's
books too. We brought some.
Oh, what?
books.
Oh, he brought all these books. Yeah, so the books there, they're all for free. Everything in this tradition is free. Feel free to take them. And Charles, it's been great to see you. Please come back. Yeah.
I was, well, in my tradition, we have several forms of formal practice. It's not just sitting meditation, but chanting, walking meditation. Does your tradition have any things like that besides sitting meditation?
Yeah. If I just had to sit all day, I would be really miserable.
Yeah.
So walking meditation is very common. And in our tradition, you usually establish like a 20-pace line, and then you fold the hands in front. Back is too informal. Usually it helps to keep mindfulness to have them in front, and then you walk very slowly and mindfully, but at a sort of normal pace along. And you can either keep a mantra with your footsteps, like Buddho means awake, that's a very common one, or whatever mantra you use, and take special care to note when you hit the center of the path on both ends, and then turn around and walk back. And sort of check your mindfulness at each of those 3 points. I find for me, continuing the breath meditation, especially when you develop this full-bodied, robust conception of it, where the breath energy begins to course up and down the meridians, basically, that can be very powerful to keep going with with walking meditation. And yeah, some monks I know that's their main mode of practice. They'll walk for 8 hours. And eventually, if you get really quiet, then you'll stop and then sit. And we do chant a lot. Our chanting's less fun than most other traditions. We sort of have 3 tones we just go back and forth on. So, but we do that. And the Pali Suttas, and the Suttas in general, will clean you out in a powerful way. When I think people who have really immersed themselves in sacred texts from any tradition know this. Bhikkhu Bodhi, who's one of the prime translators of the Pali tradition, couldn't meditate in his beginning years for more than 30 minutes or so because he had terrible migraines. And yet he studied and translated the suttas for decades. And he can meditate longer now, but I've met him and some other scholar monks who have spent their years studying, and they're like driftwood. It's like the heaviness has just been bled out of them. And something about immersing yourself in the words of wisdom like that really does affect you, as I'm sure you know if you've done chanting like that. So yes, chanting's important. And important practice in our tradition is if you can keep a mantra going or a small chant in your head over time and over the day, it can help a lot. So
We, our primary teacher, she goes by a common name, Bobby Rhodes. She's Zen Master Sun Hyang, but she says, call me Bobby. And when she leads the walking meditation retreat, it might be exercise.
Yeah.
Just to get your body recovered from sitting so much.
Yeah, it's helpful. And Qigong actually has been is sort of a secret weapon of a lot of senior teachers I know. It's a really powerful way of dropping awareness from the head to the body. I recommend cold showers, but no one takes me up on it. So
I don't know.
yeah, I know no one does. Yeah, that's helpful. Yeah, and I know some people who have had a really deep mental problems where what the teachers told them to do was, I think they ate a big meal and then ran around the meditation hall for about 5 hours straight. So that seemed to work. So yeah, but that's not common. So yeah. Some questions on the live stream. The start time, Stan Hoffman. Yes, that's usually 10 a.m. We started early today because we had a little sitting at 9:30. So I thought I'd just start streaming early for the sake of it. But usually it'll be at 10. And the email where you can reach Clear Mountain is on the website, clearmountainmonastery.org, or info@clearmountain.org, clearmountainmonastery.org, and that's on the website too. I don't think there's many questions here. Okay. Well, I think we'll call it good if everyone's, yeah. Okay. So thank you for joining us, everyone on YouTube and Facebook. And yeah, we'll be live streaming tomorrow, Monday at 6:30 p.m. Mara here has kindly offered her office for that. So it's been one more element of welcome from the people here, and along with a gigantic bottle of apple juice yesterday. So yeah, and we'll just be here once again for those who are in the Winthrop area. Cascade Hermitage is cascadehermitage.org is the center being set up by the Padres, and yeah, we'll just be around and going on alms round at the farmers market every Saturday at 10 a.m. and doing these group potluck / teachings at 10 a.m. every Sunday, and live streaming at 6:30 p.m. every Monday. So glad to have everyone.
Tell me more about your alms round to the market. I saw you there yesterday.
Oh, really? Yes.
I actually wrote on the window and yelled at you. And I saw you two guys together.
It just got me.
Oh yeah. We I may not have heard you. I've gotten some great yells on alms round before, though. I think in Australia we usually go barefoot, and the best comment I ever got was "no sandals. Even Jesus wears sandals." I like that a lot. And I got a Hail Buddha in Idaho.
Oh, jeez.
But it was good. Yeah, we in our tradition we don't touch money, can't store food, and can't ask for things apart from water unless invited. So it was the Buddha's way of making the monks and nuns not be able to cut themselves off in a spiritual cocoon. So basically, we're dependent on laity every day for our food, and while that's provided right now by not on alms round for me, once a week on Saturday at 10 a.m. I'll be at the farmers market from like 10 a.m. to maybe 11, maybe 11:30. We'll see. And people can just offer food in my bowl, and if they want, and that's what I'll eat for the day for my meal before noon. And whatever people give is wonderful. Yeah. Okay.